Perfect. Thank you so much. We're gonna restart our conversation with our next session on AI and privacy, with a conversation that will be led by my dear friend and colleague, Professor Teresa Scassa. Teresa Scassa is the Canada Research Chair in Information Law and Policy at the University of Ottawa. She's also a member of the Centre for Law, Technology and Society. And she's one of Canada's foremost privacy experts. And so without further ado, Teresa, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. So thank you, Florian, for the introduction. Thank you, all of you, for turning out for this conference. It's wonderful to see so many of you in the room. We just had a great session this morning, and we're going to have a conversation now about AI and privacy. So it's kind of a small topic. I don't know how we'll fill the space, but we'll try. We've obviously are running a bit late. Don't worry, there's a plan for this afternoon, so we'll get that sorted. I'm going to start by introducing our wonderful panelists, and then I will ask each of them to give a short provocation or introduction, and then we'll have a conversation about AI and privacy. So sitting on my, I'm very bad about left and right, but sitting next to me is Woody Hartzog, who you may recognize from the previous panel. We are making Woody earn his lunch today. He's a professor of law and class of 1960 scholar at Boston University School of Law. He's also a non-resident fellow at the Cordell Institute for Policy in Medicine and Law at Washington University. Next to him is Andrea Slane, who is a professor in the Legal Studies program at the Ontario Tech University, Faculty of Social Science and Humanities. And her primary research focus is on protecting the interests of users and subjects of digital information and communication technologies, especially youth and the elderly. And I call her a hidden gem in Canadian privacy law because she's not in a law faculty and so sometimes tends to get overlooked, but her work is terrific. And next to her is my colleague, Céline Castet-Renard, who is a full professor in the civil law section of the Faculty of Law at the University of Ottawa and the chair of accountable artificial intelligence in a global context and the chair of AI law at the Artificial and Natural Intelligence Toulouse Institute. She's also an expert at the Observatory Online Platform Economy for the EC and a fellow at the Internet Society Project at Yale University with a focus in her research on AI law. So that's our panel. And I'll turn it over to you, Woody, for your opening statements.
Thank you so much. It's a pleasure to be able to talk about this. So I am probably first and foremost a privacy scholar. So thinking about AI and privacy together is a really exciting topic for me. So I want to start with 3 simple points as a provocation. The first point is when thinking about AI and privacy, it's important not to I think personalize AI, so to get carried away with anthropomorphizing and giving AI agency. When you picture AI violating people's privacy, don't picture a robot or a digital assistant. Picture the face of Sam Altman, who runs OpenAI, right, or someone else. And so that's point number 1. Point number 2 is I'm immediately going to break rule number 1 and talk about the ways in which AI actually works to violate our privacy. And the ways in which I like to think about it is that AI is hungry, leaky, sneaky, and exclusory. So what do I mean by hungry, leaky, sneaky, and exclusory? First, it's hungry in that, of course, it requires jaw-droppingly large amounts of data to properly train. So its appetite is massive, and so you have to have meaningful rules to curb its appetite, but also there are questions around what it gets to keep, right? So one of the interesting questions around AI that's a little bit different than standard data protection models has to do with enforcement, things like rights of deletion. So they collect all this data, the models then get trained on it, and then you can delete the data, but do you have to delete the models? And this is a key question that we're talking about in data privacy circles. It's leaky. It's leaky in the sense that it leaks secrets all the time. It is capable of doing so at a large scale, particularly the more it trains on and the more it relies upon memorization. Then a lot of those things that are private facts get leaked out. But it also is used or can be used for revealing other people's secrets, and it can be quite good at that. It can wrench our images or facts about us out of obscurity. It can be used by those that want to do the watchers. It's sneaky. It is sneaky not only in the sense that it's unclear always how it works or how it operates. This is, of course, the explainability issue with respect to AI, but it is also sneaky in the ways in which it manipulates us as humans. It can be quite good at very subtly channeling our behavior in one direction or another, and this is a lot of the work around anthropomorphization and dark patterns and other sorts of things. And finally, it's exclusory, and it's exclusory at least in two ways, one of which, of course, one of the main topics of AI is using personal information to discriminate in ways that we think are harmful or unjust. But it is also exclusory in the sense that it can exclude us from areas of public life or areas of human development that we think are important, particularly when technologies like facial recognition are being used to surveil us en masse and collectively. And so the final point that I want to make, so the second point is the problems. AI is hungry, leaky, sneaky, and exclusory. How do we confront that? And the final point is simply that I don't think data protection law is going to be enough. And it seems like our conversations today, we've settled on that. One approach that I'll just throw out from a US perspective, because we lack the commitments to privacy as a fundamental human right that exists in other areas of the world, I have proposed a relational approach with Neil Richards and a couple of other scholars, thinking about how we might impose duties of loyalty, care, and confidentiality as ways to respond to the hungry, leaky, sneaky, and exclusory problems. And I'll leave it there because I know that we're on a tight deadline, but thank you for the opportunity.
All right, thanks so much. Andrea.
Okay, so I had the fortune of going to law school during the time when the Personal Information Protection and Electronic Documents Act came into force in Canada. So my entire career has been influenced by personal data protection legislation in Canada. I also, at the time of my graduation, got involved in a kind of unusual opportunity-taking moment where there was concern about online child sexual abuse materials circulating on the internet, which was the sort of big technology of the moment. And so I got to have this sort of odd position of being somewhere between a privacy advocate and an advocate for finding solutions to a dark problem, which then moved over into non-consensual distribution of intimate images and those sorts of things. And again, sort of trying to work with privacy as a thing that needs to be protected and promoted, and recognize that different kinds of privacy and different people's privacy might be at stake in different sorts of contexts, but doing so in a way that didn't present insurmountable barriers to valuable uses of emerging and evolving technologies. So 5 years ago, before the sort of huge upswing of AI development and changes, I was looking at things like the right to be forgotten, and the role of search engines, what they were back then, which has changed so dramatically in the meantime. Profile compilation, what that looks like and what it could be good for and what it's obviously bad for. And then moving more recently into really embracing the participatory turn in a lot of social sciences for policy development and tech design around things like facial recognition technology used both in the public sector and by commercial entities. And then I have the honor of having been one of the people who was supposed to come to We Robot here in 2020 with work that I'm continuing to do on the promises and pitfalls of humanoid robots and other avatars who are capable of conversation to support and provide companionship and potential help with information seeking, especially by older people. And I've done with that, like really sort of trying to talk to people, actual people who are stakeholders, either as potential users of a particular kind of technology or potential subjects to systems that they have either no choice or some potential influence to see where things will go in the future. So I don't want to say too much more because I'm trying to be mindful of time, but I think there are two tracks that continue to be important for privacy, not just as a sort of thing in itself, which I think really is the core. It's not maybe surprising that this is the first panel to go dig deeply, because it really is kind of the core of where thinking about AI has been, because the principles at least, and here in Canada I think that's been true too, the privacy commissioners have been most active in trying to actually on the ground do something more quickly than the vision that comes forward in the ADA, the act that's been proposed and that has little substance, as Florian has mentioned. But the two tracks are the profiling, tracking, and predicting, which is a longer standing issue, but one that's obviously been exacerbated in great ways. Another is the blurring of the real and the created, and the manipulability of that, and then maybe also the promise of that. I mean, there's also always a sort of more positive spin that you can put on some of these abilities that I think should not get lost in our obviously justified concerns about the future. So I'll leave it with that I continue to be interested in seeing privacy as a problem-solving kind of mechanism that is not about blocking, but it's also about supporting and enabling in a rights protective kind of way a future that we can all be happy to live in.
All right, thank you very much. Céline.
Thank you, Chirza, and both of you, because I have almost similar things to say. I think the relationship between AI and privacy are very conflicting today, especially because of the angry thing and with foundational models, such as large language models, which needs vast amounts of data and vast amounts of source of data. And if you have model, very broad model, with no specific purposes, you need more and more data, more and more personal data. So I think that's I think that's the main concern today. I would like also highlight another main concern, to my opinion, regarding surveillance, technologies of surveillance. You already mentioned, especially things like facial recognition or algorithmic video surveillance. Because today I think we have we stand today in a very tense situation. If I give you the example of the AI Act, we already mentioned it, of course. We have today 3 different versions of this act between the different bodies of legislation, between the European Commission, the Council of the EU, and the European Parliament. And the 3 versions are very different regarding facial recognition. Just to sum up, regarding the proposal, the primary proposal of the Commission released in 2021, we had a prohibition of facial recognition by law enforcement agencies in public spaces, except 3 broad exceptions. We then have the version of the Council, which explained the exception, and we also have the version of the European Parliament last June, which banned the facial recognition. So as you can see, we have very different approach. And just to mention the fact that the European Parliament represents directly the citizen, so you understand the ban. And regarding the Council of Europe, of the EU, sorry, the Council of the EU, this is directly the interest of member states. And in our context, for instance, in France, with the context of the Olympic Games next year, in 2024 in Paris, we really need to have facial recognition for law enforcement agencies. So this is a kind of tension we can see. And sadly, I think in the context of the conflict in Israel, currently, I think we enter once again in an intense period, and I think we will see a direct opposition between privacy and security, national security. And I think we stand here now, once again.
All right, well, thank you for that. So we've heard in some of those opening provocations, we've heard about privacy and national security, about facial recognition technology, chatbots, profiling, predictive technologies, and those are things that we have been talking about for a while in the realm of privacy. So my first question for the panel is, what is it about AI that makes privacy issues different, that changes the character of privacy issues? And maybe I'll start at the other end of the panel with Céline.
I don't know if there is a difference of nature, but for sure there is a difference of scale, and it means a lot, I think. And with this difference of scale, we also have difference of characteristics and capacities with AI systems, more capacities to infer, more capacities to create clusters, and not only correlation and patterns. We also have clustering, so sometimes it means things, sometimes it means nothing, but sometimes decisions are making based on this kind of clustering. So I think we have different characteristic here, and probably it will lead us toward other issues and new issues. Maybe we cannot see very well today, not yet. And also because of these new capacities of inferencing many specific information of people, we have more and more sensitive information revealed by this kind of process. And also, because AI systems are now capable of cognitive functions, prediction, recommendation, decision making, content generation, it means the AI system can directly apply to individuals and can affect directly individuals. We have many examples regarding social benefits, loans, and so on. And on the one hand, there is this individual impact, and of course, a global impact. We will talk about that later, I think. And on the one hand, this individual impact, and we also have, on the other hand, a lack of transparency and a lack of user awareness of this capacity and the use of personal data in many ways and for many purposes. And we will see that the principle of purpose and data minimization, all these principles are cancelled today, I would say. And if we think about examples such as Preview AI, we can see that we have personal data such as images, which are scrapped on the internet and used for totally different purposes. And of course, this kind of tools, this kind of facial recognition tools can misidentify people in other circumstances. And I think the use of AI tools in many different situations and circumstances are very impactful for the people individually.
Thank you. Andrea.
All that. Plus, I think that the added layer of interacting with non-human actors is something that's sort of important to add in that wasn't really there before, that are capable of collecting through sensors, through sort of real-time processing of the words you speak or the things that you do, the movements that you make, the things that you type. All of that are sort of new dimensions to the concerns that we had before about collecting information, using it, and disclosing it. And that is, in and of itself, a sort of scale and scope problem still, but it's also just like a new kind of quality to the types of concerns that we now have to face with AI.
Woody?
All that and all that.
Yeah.
It's great to go last because you can just emphatically agree with what comes first. So I think that it's important to remember that AI is lots of different things, and so when we talk about sort of what's new with AI, it's important to also try to zero in on what we actually mean. So facial recognition is one kind. Generative LLM models might be another different kind. And so to think about zeroing in on each one of those, but to talk in broad strokes for a second, I do think that there are two things that are worth commenting on that might be unique in the discussion around AI. The first is remarkable efficiency gains for surveillance, for whatever task you want to do. The ability to wrench from obscurity almost any moment of our lives or every place that we go is something that is a fundamental challenge to our traditional notions of privacy. And so I've written for a long time that one of the most underappreciated aspects of privacy is the fact that most of what we do, most of our day-to-day movements, most of our conversations when we're gossiping about our coworkers at a bar is shrouded in obscurity. So it's technically revealed to the public, but the idea that it would be datafied and then shared and distributed with others is foreign to us for the most part. We don't think about that in our threat model. AI changes that threat model in a fundamental and significant way. It is an obscurity eviscerating machine. And I think that challenges a lot of our generally societally held notions around what it means to be private, particularly around concepts of privacy in public, such that it may be such a difference in magnitude that we might want to consider it a difference in kind. The other thing that I think is a significant change about AI that affects the discussion around how we regulate it. There's a saying at the We Robot conference, which has been referenced a couple of times already, which has been brought up. It wasn't originally We Robot, but the idea is that any technology of sufficient complexity is virtually indistinguishable from magic. And I think that one of the things that we're seeing in the area around regulating AI is increased attention because of this seemingly magic quality or deceptive quality. So your two tracks that you identified, I think, are right on. The idea that this is something that evokes feelings and emotions in us, that even though we rationally know that the chatbot is not human, we can't help but feel emotionally affected by it in some significant ways. And the fact that this can be automated and weaponized in a much easier way, I think changes at least broadens the scope of what we traditionally think of as a privacy interest in at least law, certainly is social.
Yeah. So all of that. And I think I'll take the chair's liberty to jump in with another thing that I think is really very different about AI and privacy. And that with privacy and data protection law, we have built this paradigm around the protection of personal information or personal data. And we often distinguish between personal data and anonymized data is okay and safe to use. And I think that those distinctions are now no longer sufficient, no longer adequate, and are breaking down. And so we're seeing data about humans, whether identified or not, being used in ways that have very significant impacts on individuals as well as groups, and I think that we're having to change our paradigm, and we'll probably talk a little bit more about that later on in the panel. For now, I think I'll ask our panelists what the big challenges are that they see in their own jurisdictions when it comes to addressing AI and privacy. And Andrea, we'll start with you from a Canadian perspective.
So as has been mentioned, we do have this legislation on the table that again, interestingly, grows out of the private sector data protection reform process. So the Artificial Intelligence and Data Act. I think it's challenging because it's very Canadian in a lot of ways, because it's like, okay, we got this thing, we want to get in on it, but we're going to wait and see. We still want to see what other people are doing and take our time, which isn't always a bad thing, but may be a bad thing in this circumstance. And And I think that the sort of lack of clarity, I mean, there are commitments in there about sort of working across different current areas of expertise within the government, so that the privacy commissioner and the industry folks and the different people in charge of consumer protection and maybe human rights, and the people will work together. But what that's actually going to look like is challenging. Like, it's really not something that we've got mapped out yet. And the privacy commissioner certainly very strongly wants to be in on all of the conversations, and should be. But how do we transition from really rooting a lot of our responses in data protection to something that's bigger? I think is a big challenge. Even though the idea is there, it's like the sort of what it's actually going to look like, I think, is one of our biggest challenges. Yeah.
I've asked Céline. Céline has 1 foot in Europe and 1 foot in Canada. But I've asked her to perhaps talk to us about the European perspective.
Yes, I think everybody knows that the European Union has been at the forefront regarding data protection, of course, with the GDPR. And now we'd like to have this Brussels effect we already talked about regarding AI Act. We will see if it will happen. But the first challenge, I think, for the European Union is to articulate all this legislation, because we also have the DMA, the Digital Market Act, DSA, Digital Services Act, and so on, because it's not finished. And we will also have 2 other directives regarding liability of AI or liability of product. And we have to articulate all these provisions, all this norm. And just to give you an example between the articulation, regarding the articulation between the GDPR and the AI Act, we can think about Article 10, for instance, where there are many provisions for data governance, data management, and there is one specific provision to allow to reveal sensitive data in order to tackle discrimination and biases, because many biases are based on gender, health, handicap, and so on. So we need to have this kind of information, and traditionally in the EU we protect more this kind of provision. We also have a specific provision regarding governance with the integration of data protection authority within the governance we would like to build with a supervisor on AI, and each EU text would like to create a new regulator and a new model of governance. So we really need to think and to articulate all these authorities. And we also need to think together the data protection impact assessment and the freedom rights impact assessment, or AI impact assessment we would like to create. So we need to have, in my opinion, only one tool, because you cannot reason in silo. And we also need to improve our the articulation of norm at the external level, at the international level, for better cooperation. I think with Canada it won't be a big challenge, because I can see many convergence in Bill C-27 and AI Act. With the US, I'm not sure. We'll see. If I consider our success regarding the GDPR and the Safe Harbor and Privacy Shield and Data Protection Framework, I'm not sure, but we will see that. But I think that will be the main challenge for all the jurisdictions, to be able to have common standards regarding the regulation of AI.
Woody.
So I think there are several challenges that the US is facing in terms of trying to regulate AI with respect to privacy. And both of them sort of center on the idea that privacy is an individualistic notion, The idea that we should have laws that respect my privacy or your privacy, and that we should have informational self-determination. We should be able to decide for ourselves how our information is used, how it flows. This results in two major problems, at least in US frameworks. The first is the harm problem. So a lot of the harms, the privacy harm problems we get from AI are easy to see at the big picture level, at the societal level or collective level. We see degradation of mental health, we see chilling effects, we see decreased opportunities, we see disparate impact, we see corrosion of public discourse. But at the individual level, these harms seem kind of de minimis. It becomes difficult to know when to set the threshold. When was something too manipulative? When was something too corrosive in terms or oppressive in terms of surveillance? And so it becomes really hard to monitor that. The other area that you run into with AI is it challenges the notion that informational self-determination is the right goal in the first place. The way that gets manifested in the United States is in giving people control over their personal data, which is seen as a good. Who doesn't like the idea of personal control over information? The problem with that is, well, there's three. One is that the idea of information, or that privacy is control over our information, is that it's illusory. There's no world in which we actually have meaningful control. It's not like I can call up OpenAI and say, hey, I would like for you to only delete the 7 pages out of my book that are really sensitive, or that one scrape of my personal profile that you took that one time, but you can only use it for XYZ purposes. Like, if we could do that, maybe we would have real control, but of course that's never how it works. We're given a dashboard, we're given some buttons to fiddle around with, right? We're only given we can only click the choices that we're given, and so it's really an illusion, even under optimal circumstances. Control also is the wrong way to think about privacy, particularly with respect to AI, because it's overwhelming, right? So it's I think a mistake to think that our best outcome is the collective wisdom of individual self-motivated decisions, all of which are done at the discrete moment. Like, so what's this one decision going to do to come back and hurt me now if I disclose just a little bit of information here and a little bit of information there? And we never have the opportunity to actually zoom out and look at the collective weight of each time we expose ourselves and make the decision to do so. The third reason that control is the wrong way of thinking about privacy, and the way that AI challenges that, is that it's myopic. And so your point about how this is not just an individualistic thing, but societally or collectively, we get challenged by AI. So now what's happening, because AI is so hungry, it eats up all the personal data about all of us, and it uses that data not just to make inferences about me, but you and you and you and all of us, right? And so we're all in this together, in the same way that my sister kept taking DNA tests, and I was like, please don't, because that's also the story of me. And with this new data breach at 23andMe, it sort of was proven right. And so AI is the story of us, right? And so the idea of some sort of individualized protection and control over personal information just breaks down, given these population level insights that are really some of the major threats to privacy.
I guess my next question for the panel is whether the challenges that are brought by AI technologies and processes help us to identify underemphasized features of privacy protection that should play a more prominent role. In other words, are there things that we haven't really made use of in the past, or that haven't played such a significant role that might be more useful today? And I will. Does anyone want to jump in first on this? I've been very, I've been very controlling, haven't I? Dictating who speaks when. Who would like to jump in?
I could say something about that. So the project that I've done with the older people and robots, I think has been especially good at pointing up the need to take concepts like privacy by design, that's been a sort of strong influence on sort of thinking about privacy as something that doesn't have to happen, ex ante, and that does have to happen ex ante instead of just ex post problems, because it's something that really requires looking at what people who are going to be affected by the implementation of a system or the creation of a device or the integration of different systems together. What do they want? What do they feel like is going to be the impact on them? And so I think taking this sort of bit that has gotten a lot of play, privacy by design, and making that bigger, to something that includes democratic process, that includes public consultation, that includes meaningful public consultation, influence on design and policy design, I think is something that is going to happen with AI.
Mm-hmm.
I think that one of the things that we might want to examine a little harder in the face of AI is actually the bedrock concept of the reasonable expectations of privacy test, which I'm just going to say, I guess I'm just think all privacy law is broken now. Not only is control the wrong goal for privacy, but the reasonable expectations of privacy test is fundamentally unworkable in the age of AI. And the reason why is that over time, we're going to be conditioned to tolerate everything. One of the things that AI does is it brings to stark light the normalization of surveillance. It happens sort of very slowly but consistently, and the more it gets rolled out, particularly with facial recognition, it always comes presented as a gift. It becomes presented as an efficiency, right? Oh, look how easy it is to board the plane where you don't have to pull out your boarding pass. We can just scan your face. And that conditions us, right? It first moves us into a stage of noticing that something is unexceptional habituation, right? The fact that we see it all the time, and so we stop to sort of take note of it every time we see it. You might react a little weirdly now when you see facial recognition at the airport, but I promise you in 5 years you won't. What happens when we become used to seeing something as unexceptional is that we then start to see it everywhere, and we start to think that we become favorably disposed to it as a normative matter because no one else is objecting to it, right? The idea is we sort of have this background sense that, oh, well, I guess it must be okay. We've been using it for 5 years, right? And then we sort of lose track of the way in which we lost the power fight in that discussion. And the reasonable expectations of privacy tests sets us up to fail exactly like that, because it conditions our threshold for what we consider to be acceptable or not based on society's expectations of privacy, which slowly but inevitably will get worn down.
Céline.
Regarding the EU, I think the conception of privacy is not so important than in the US. We also have data protection laws. Of course, that's the case also in the US, but we have an overlap of both, a combination, let's say, of both kind of regulation. And I think the failure maybe is less important regarding the fact that we usually combine data protection and privacy. And privacy by itself stand by itself very few. There are very few circumstances where privacy stands by itself. And also in the EU Charter of the Human Rights, which was enacted in 2000, we have two different articles, Article 7 to protect privacy, and Article 8 to protect data protection, to protect personal data. So we have two different instruments in the same charter. So I think that's probably the reason why we combine both. And in the AI Act, we would like to focus on fundamental rights, not only privacy or discrimination or things like that. We really would like to have a broad approach. But as we already mentioned earlier, it's not sufficient to have this kind of intention and just to say we would like to protect fundamental rights. I think everybody agreed with that. But how can we do that? And I think we have to pay attention to the ways we need to do that and to make it efficient. I don't know if the fundamental rights impact assessment we already mentioned could be a good way to be sure to protect people. We will see, but I think we need to look at this further to ensure we correctly protect privacy and other fundamental rights.
Thank you. I want to make sure that there's time for people to ask questions in this panel. I have more questions for the panel, but if you have questions too, I'd like to leave some space for that. So, and there are microphones set up in the room. Maybe what I'll do is I'll get the panelists talking a little bit about group privacy. I'm going to ask about group privacy, but if you want to head to the microphones, then the floor will be yours after that. And so for the panel, the concept of group privacy or collective privacy has come up a little bit in what we've been saying and discussing here. I can see we're going to have to leave lots of room for questions, so that's good. Do you have any thoughts on the role that group privacy is going to play as we move forward in thinking about how to govern AI?
Okay. I can see two different ways. One is about discrimination, and when we have AI system which discriminate people, individual people, it generally discriminate the entire group regarding the criteria which have been used to build the AI system. So I can see here a group effect, a negative effect. And also regarding the negative impact of AI, regarding the scale we already mentioned, for instance, when the disinformation, misinformation spread very broadly within the specific categories of people, or sometimes within a larger population.
And I think I'd just add the word vulnerability to that, so that particular groups are going to be more vulnerable to privacy risks and privacy harms, and that is certainly something that needs to be taken into account on a group level rather than just on an individual level.
I would agree entirely with that.
Okay. So we clearly have some questions from the audience. What I'm going to do is I'll start with Katie at this microphone, and then we'll alternate microphones. But I would ask you to briefly introduce yourself and to try and keep your questions brief, because we want to make sure everybody who wants to ask a question has a chance to do so. So go ahead, Katie.
Thanks, Teresa. I'm Katie Salegi from the University of Manitoba. I had such a good chuckle, Woody, when you gave that example about the DNA kits. During this session, one of my former students texts me and he says, "Somebody gave me and my girlfriend some of those DNA sampling kits, but don't worry, we didn't use them. We won't." I'm like, good job, good job. So my question is about language. And we talked a little bit about this last night in the session with Kate Crawford. And one of the things that I'm really concerned about when we're using large language models is this slippage of the malleability of words and the way in which that's going to have consequences, both for like our construction of our reality, and then that is going to move into the legal sphere. And I think, Woody, you wrote about this in one of your papers where you talk about the tort of disclosure of the public disclosure of private facts, and you say, well, you know, the test is something like it's a public disclosure to the public of something that might be public, right? And you're using the word public 3 times in this definition, and every time you use it to mean something different. And I find that to be a really powerful illustration of how we're thinking through these problems about language, because if we start delegating this decision-making responsibility to large language models or generative AI, right, we need to be really worried about what kind of meaning is going to be drawn from that. So I guess I'd love to hear some thoughts about privacy in that context, both the insights that might be generated from the data scraping that moves into that generative AI, and then that idea of language slippage or meaning, and how that might connect with privacy.
Okay. So good to get an easy question for the first time. Anyone want to jump in on that?
I think that is one of the greatest tension points between the US and Canada, is sort of that issue about whether public means free-for-all, do whatever you want with the information, or the Canadian sort of more nuanced idea that it's more contextual, that it doesn't have to be an all or nothing kind of thing, and that, I think contextually we have probably the better approach, even if it does have different impacts on things like freedom of expression and the sort of other big areas of conflict or difference maybe, or friction between the US and Canada. So I think that's one thing that I think happens in terms of what public means in different jurisdictions.
I'll just add, Kate, I completely agree with you. I worry about, when I think of language slippage, I think that there's just enough room in a lot of concepts for shenanigans by those in power that would frankly rather bend the will to match their profit incentive or power exertion incentives. And so I think that what's important that we keep in mind for law is we need a sort of layered approach that does its best to be cognizant of that slippage. I tell my students the most important section of any statute is, of course, the definition section. And that we clarify what we mean by the words when we mean them, so that we don't start deploying words like privacy or public, which, by the way, also has no real set meaning, which we could talk about, right? But I think that's an important way to fight the slippage.
And if I can, two concepts or words that I see a lot of squishiness around and that worry me a lot in this space are ownership in relation to data. And what people mean when they talk about owning their data. And the other one is public interest, because we're doing all sorts of things in the public interest, but nobody wants to, really dig down into what the public interest means. And it can mean anything from doing everything you can to stimulate innovation and support the economy to, in other words, giving everybody all the data, to doing things that are protective of human rights and other interests. So anyway, those are a couple of slippery words that really worry me. So over to this microphone.
Hi, I'm Evan Light from York University. Also a member of the Right to Your Face Coalition with at least one colleague in this room, which seeks to influence facial recognition policy in Canada, which is currently under review federally. And also created with some of my graduate students the facial recognition installation you'll see next to the conference table out there. Question regarding sort of facial recognition and AI-enabled surveillance. I agree with you, Woody, that obscurity is eviscerated. We've willfully blanketed our cities and our homes with cameras. There's really no going back. And so I think at this critical juncture where we're thinking of policy in a new regulatory sense, where we're looking in the rearview mirror saying, oh shit, we need to deal with this, but also into the future with how do we deal with the future? What sort of regulatory levers are there? What do we need to invent? How do we deal with a situation that we don't fully understand and in which our traditional powers around regulation don't apply anymore? I think and this has sort of been stewing in me since the first panel this morning, and I think the example it's interesting, but I think that law can be really theoretical. And so I'm wondering, and sort of on the ground, how do you envision these sorts of regulations being applied in the real world, where sort of the cat's out of the bag and it's already everywhere?
I didn't get your question, sorry. I didn't get it.
Sorry?
What? Yeah.
Is the question, I apologize just because there's a little bit of an echo here.
Yeah.
Is the question, how do we regulate technologies when the cat's already out of the bag, for
Exactly.
instance? Yeah.
Yeah.
So I think that to say that the cat is already out of the bag gives away too much ground. I think that one of the things that I've encouraged lawmakers to resist is the inevitability narrative of any technology, but particularly artificial intelligence. It's often pitched as this, force it's coming whether you like it or not, which of course I think is a convenient narrative for industry when they would love to roll out the AI technologies. Lawmakers have the power to say, well, actually, it's not coming, and it's not coming in several different directions, and one of the things that we often, I think, lack is a regulatory imagination that considers maybe we just don't at all. right? And I've actually argued that facial recognition technologies in mass, we will be worse off with them. And as a result, we should prohibit them. And I realize that's not the sort of common assumption about it, and it gets harder politically, and I think this is where you're going, it gets harder politically day by day when we become used to these technologies. We use them to unlock our phones, we use them to board planes, but at the end of the day, humans created these technologies, and we also empower humans to create rules about how they're used, if they're used at all. And so just to keep that conversation going, I think is step one. And then we'll see where we go from there.
Yeah, thank you.
Oh, wait, I think.
Oh, sorry, did you want to?
Too many questions.
Oh.
Just to add some very specific specific provision we could embed in laws. We could think about the scope, because I think, for instance, facial recognition and public space, we have a room here to define the scope, the material scope and the territorial scope of the use of this kind of technology. In the airport, it's probably okay, but in the street, maybe it's not. So this is the kind of thing we have to think about, proportionality, necessity, and we can also use moratorium, I don't know how to say that, yeah, to avoid the ban, because sometimes ban is not a good solution as well. So yeah, we have several legal instruments, I guess.
Okay, well, thank you. Marcelo.
Marcelo Thompson from Hong Kong U. I want to connect two points that were made there in one question. The idea that the Canadian model is superior to the American one. The idea that a reasonable expectation of privacy, objective reasonableness, depends on what society accepts, right? It's a normative expectation, and in this way it contrasts with the idea that technology determines, right? It's what we as a society accept. I want to connect that with the points that Woody was raising earlier, whether this distinction is at the end of the day something that disappears in the light of the concerns that he was presenting. And the question is, you pointed out the challenges that we face with a control understanding of privacy are the same that we face with a reasonable expectation of privacy, which are the same that we face with an idea of contextual integrity, right? And in turn, is the question a question about privacy, or is it more broadly a question about normativity? Is it about whether we are still capable of relating, right, to the world from a normative perspective, or whether this is something that we increasingly alienate. Right? And is there, if that is the case, is there an answer, or is the cat indeed out of the bag? And if there is hope, is technology itself in turn something that may offer us some hope of making sense of things? Might the answer be in AI, in enabling us to navigate this normative reality? So at the end of the day, would the balance, right, be deferred to another mode of normative, right, reasoning and intervention?
Okay, we're getting softball questions from the audience.
Well, I mean, I think it is important to distinguish between normative and normalized, right? Like, I mean, so getting used to being surveilled all the time normalizes surveillance. But I think I'm going to try to be optimistic about holding on to some sort of normative concept of what is acceptable in a free and democratic society as a standard that we could continue to use, that would, maybe impose things like distinctions between different contexts, maybe impose moratorium before we can figure it out, all those sorts of things that are basically meant to safeguard that normative value that, I don't think is out the window entirely, although I do think it can be influenced in a way that, and that inevitability kind of narrative, I think, is one that does undermine it, especially when you do have, like the previous question, I mean, the government services where they compel people to participate because there's no other alternative. We can't really opt out of, having your face scanned or becoming part of a digital ID system or something like that. Those are problematic because that's not about the normative. That's about just compulsion. So I'll just leave it at that. Yeah.
I'll just respond quickly and say I think that the answer here is to reconsider the entire approach around questions of how power is collected, used, and distributed. And the law has an approach to this, right? The law focuses on relationships where people are at an extreme power imbalance. They're on the bad end of a power relationship. They don't have all the information. They're not able to make any sort of controls, but they're dependent upon the relationship. Does that sound familiar to a lot of our relationships with those that deploy AI? And build it around betrayal, which I think is a little less susceptible to creep through normative, the slide of normative expectations.
Okay, well, thank you. Now, I've been given the 5-minute warning, and I am not going to cut into your lunchtime, even if that means that we're going to leave some questions unanswered. So I apologize in advance for that, but also you're welcome. So Bita, we'll go to you next.
Okay, I'll try to be quick. Okay, Bita Mani, Faculty of Law, Queen's University. So this is actually a perfect segue into what I was going to pose as a question or think thread. So far, Woodrow, you expressed the unacceptable habituation, and we get some of the pushback about maybe the cat being out of the bag and learned helplessness components built into that aspect of it. And then moving on to what Andrea was saying, though, is part of this, though, part of the reflecting the need to actually step out of the space of consumer protection that's specifically focused on privacy regulation to other areas. So, for example, going back to CRISPR-Cas9 gene editing, there was a moratorium on the use and application of those for human applications, and that was not a problem. With the political will, you can get there. One of the sort of further points on this story, though, is the fact that the market controls, so back to Andrew, your point, I don't know if you all saw the media reports on this in September with respect to the consumer analysis of cars recording private personal information in vehicles, new modern vehicles, including sexual information, which is recorded, and it's part of the contract. It's from a end user license agreement and the contractual governance, right? Contracts of adhesion and so forth. And in those instances, right, came out as quite a news story in September with respect to this. So planned obsolescence is part of the industry move to foreclose market choices for dumb, not smart technology adoptions. So what aspects of regulation can be focused on, both right of repair or the regulation of planned obsolescence, or the need to preserve dumb options rather than smart technologies, so that we're not all effectively forced into that outside of the consumer protection privacy-related regulations? Thanks.
Yeah, interesting question. Thank you. Who would like to jump in on that one?
Yes. I agree. Yeah.
Okay. That's good.
That's good.
Next question, please.
Hi, my name's Chinmay Sharma. I'm an associate professor at Fordham Law School. I will try to make this as quick as I can, but basically, I think there are challenges to having prospective regulation that establishes goals that we want from privacy and then leaving it to industry to figure out how to comply with those, because you have commercial interests. I think there's issues with establishing exactly how we want industry to achieve certain goals, because then you have an issue of the field is rapidly advancing, everything's domain specific. And then the issue with both of those is we often don't know when industry's doing a bad job until the harm happens and we're trying to respond to it. So that's all a lead up to my question of, is there anything we can learn from the medical field and how doctors have a regime of domain-specific standard setting that they self-enforce through a code of professional ethics and licenses that we can impose on AI engineers so that they are individually both incentivized to establish those standards independently of their employers through independent boards, and then self-enforce them through professionals reporting other professionals or other people in the supply chain seeing something that might amount to malpractice. So.
And that sounds like something that you've been thinking about.
Yeah, I mean, that's a really great insight. Thank you for that. And I agree. There's some really great work being done by some people who think about the professionalization of engineers and software developers, and I think that this sort of ties into that, and I would say that I think that's a great place to look and start. I think that that can be complemented with a lot of what's I've been working on recently about the duties of loyalty, care, and confidentiality, which of course physicians are bound by for a good reason because of how vulnerable we are to them. And the way in which this plays out, because one of the common objections that we see from duties of loyalty, care, and confidentiality is it's just so vague, right? Like we have these squishy words and what do they mean? But of course it doesn't just exist at that high level. The high level is the catch-all and the wind in the sails of actually very context-specific rules that prohibit self-dealing or, you know, recommendation, taking kickbacks or recommendations, right? There's all of these very specific sub-rules which then get woven in. So if we complement professionalism with that, which then get woven into this sort of professionalism commitment, I think we could create a better world with it.
I've just been given the time's up signal. During the COVID era, one of the things I think all of us missed so much were the spaces in between things, which you never had with Zoom meetings where you had clicked leave meeting at the end and everybody disappeared. So I don't want to take away from the spaces in between. I'm sorry that I see that there are questions remaining. I hope that you'll feel free to approach the panelists at the break or to engage in those discussions with the people around your table. Thank you so much, and please join me in thanking our terrific panel for the discussion today.